Latest lines coming up from an international security conference in Munich. I want to go back to those gas attacks, though, which we saw happen a couple of hours ago. Manusha Tarkan's with us now from London, a senior policy analyst at the Centre for Global Energy Studies. Mr. Tarkan, thank you for your time. When we start to talk about natural gas and Egypt, we almost immediately talk about the relationship with Israel. I'm thinking the relationship with Jordan is perhaps even more important because Jordan is so reliant on this Egyptian gas.
Yes. Well, that's, you have already explained, this is not only the Israeli market, it is the Egyptian market, it is the Jordanian market, and the whole plans are, of course, for expanding this into an Arab gas network, to have gas coming also from Iraq into this, then feeding to Lebanon, and so on. These are the large-scale plans. I think it is really, we have to accept, it is the sensitivity of the gas, Egyptian gas being exported to Egypt, which is the main issue. And whatever the government might have the shape in the after President Mubarak, any alliances and so on, I think the public opinion in Egypt would not be that much in favor. This is not really an oil and gas question. This is more a political question. I'm no expert on it.
No, you're right. You're right. It is political.
So
to that end, does Israel...
Judging by the belligerents, yeah, if I may continue, judging by the belligerents and expansionist policies within Israeli political spectrum, not all of them, and the way they are occupying territories, they are building illegal settlements and so on, I think the public opinion around is not that much in favor. I would guess that whatever the shape of the government, they would probably revise the gas deal which has been made between the two sides. And of course, it has been as a private sector. It has been said that on the Egyptian side there have been people close to President Mubarak who have made deal, rich people or investors and so on. So I think the people afterwards would review this. Of course, in this, the network being disrupted, the poor Jordanian people are also suffering.
Israel's got two reasons to be worried, I guess, really, doesn't it? One, the supply of gas, not as vital as it is to Jordan, but still very important. And then, as you say, the political side of things, that any change, any instability in Egypt has political ramifications for them as well in their relationship, one of the few friendly relationships going on around there.
Yes, I think these are the stories which will come out as part of the whole settlement. You see, on the Israeli side, they used to burn petroleum products for generation of gas. The last 2 or 3 for the generation of electricity, they are now using gas. It was supposed to expand. It probably may not. It may be even seized. They have found, gas has been found in offshore Israel, a large gas field. It takes 2 or 3 years for that gas to get into Israeli network. That it is large enough that even people are thinking, or discussions are as to, it could be, Israel might become an exporter of gas. So there will be a disruption in between. While this is going on. It would not be the end for Israel, it would not be the end for Egypt either. Egypt will also continue and export its oil and gas. My belief is that whatever the government, they will continue their deals internationally as far as oil and gas are concerned, Suez Canal transportation and transit fees, these are all. So after a disruption, everything will go back to normal. But I think on the relationship with Israel, because of the intransigent policies of Israelis that we see in the media, I think it is not just rhetoric on this side, that there are expansionist groups within the Israeli politicians and so on. And it's not only Muslim, there are many Christians who have suffered within the Palestinian who have been misplaced and so on. It is really in that context that the gas export, I think, will be reviewed, the deal with Israelis.
Manusha Tarkan there in London talking Middle East energy with us. The reason we're discussing that are these pictures you see of a huge gas explosion, gas terminal explosion in El Arish in Egypt, which was attacked, we believe, and that supplies gas to both Israel and Jordan. Jordan saying that gas will be cut off for a week because of this explosion. These pictures sent in by a viewer from quite close to the explosion. Well, staying with Egypt, demonstrations have been planned around the world to show support for Egypt's protesters. Saturday being billed as the International Day of Solidarity after Friday, the day of departure. Egyptians have already been rallying in various cities. Brussels, around 200 gathered in front of the European Parliament. Similar numbers in Paris and in Berlin. Here's South Africa, where unions and rights groups blocked the street in front of Pretoria's Egyptian embassy. In English, Afrikaans, Zulu and Arabic, they all shouted, "Out with Mubarak." Well, since the Egyptian uprising began, the mainstream American media has focused sharply on what it all means for the United States. And there's been concern about the role Islam is playing in the protests. Mohammed Shakir has this report.
The obvious topic is the rapidly changing situation.
Across U.S. TV channels, scenarios about how things might develop in Egypt have been criticized by many as being both pessimistic and superficial. Their focus on what really matters, the impact of these events on the United States and its allies in the region. Egypt is suddenly big news in the U.S. But while the message of the Egyptian youth may have been given some attention on U.S. networks, do the Americans understand what they are saying? The young protesters' call for the removal of Mubarak and his regime was upstaged by concern for U.S. interest and the possible repercussions for Israel.
American commentators in general view the Egyptian revolution as all about the United States and Israel. It's almost as if the Egyptians don't matter.
3,000 protesters in the square of Cairo this morning.
The Fox News channel has been busy raising fears, suggesting that these protests carry an Islamic jihadist banner, raising concern about the uprising and trying to turn public opinion against the revolt and against how other journalists are reporting it.
Well, it may not be Al Jazeera's fault, but they have certainly contributed to rise in Arab anger. Al Jazeera makes a living blaming most problems in the Middle East on the USA and Israel.
Some observers see the coverage of popular uprisings in the Arab world by U.S. media as markedly different to their coverage of similar events in other parts of the world. This bias is especially evident when compared with how the U.S. media covered popular revolts in Eastern Europe.
Those revolutions, even though there would be all sorts of people, there'd be people on the right, there'd be people on the left, there'd be people who might have been pro-communist, anti-communist, whatever they were, we would look at the people in the crowds and identify with them because they were demonstrating against a repressive regime, so they're good. But when we look at a crowd of millions of Arabs, then we say, well, democracy is good, but maybe not this kind of democracy.
Egypt's protesters are determined to persist in their uprising until they reach their objectives of bringing down the regime. Despite the violent response by the authorities, with many journalists assaulted and detained, the U.S. media has been forced to delve deep into Egypt's internal affairs, looking closely at its democracy, freedom, and the legitimacy of a regime allied with Washington. With headlines like the pro-Mubarak mobs assault protesters under the watchful eye of the army, the U.S. media has had no option but report the facts.
Many of whom told me a few hours ago, I will not be happy unless he steps down.
Will these events bring about a fresh look by the U.S. media? Will they now be forced to taking a deeper look at the region? Mohammed Shakir, Al Jazeera.
Bit of other international news for you just briefly. The astronaut husband of wounded US Congresswoman Gabrielle Giffords says he will command a space shuttle mission due to take off in April. Mark Kelly stopped training for that mission last month after his wife was shot in the head in Tucson, Arizona. He will resume his training, however, next week to lead the space shuttle Endeavour's last flight. Kelly says his wife would support the decision.
Considering a bunch of other factors, including what Gabrielle would want me to do, and what her parents and her family and my family would like, I ultimately made the decision that I would like to return and command STS-134.
And in sport, 3 Pakistan cricketers are waiting to hear their fate of an anti-corruption hearing. They've been accused of spot fixing by the world governing body, the ICC, the International Cricket Council. Rahul Pathak is following the tribunal here in Doha.
Well, the 3 players, Mohammed Asif, Mohammed Amir and the former Test captain Salman Butt have all been in the building behind me, and some of them, I've been told, have been trying to get this decision deferred. The reason for that is they feel it could prejudice any future criminal trial in the UK. You may have heard that yesterday the Crown Prosecution Service in Britain has decided to charge all 3 players with accepting and obtaining money, obtaining corrupt payments. Now, the maximum term for that, if they're found guilty, is a 7-year jail term, so a very serious charge, and they feel that any possible guilty verdict in this tribunal could result in that criminal trial being unfairly prejudiced against them. They're due to appear before Westminster magistrates on the 17th of March. But I think the fact that the discussions are taking so long suggests that the ICC want to come to a decision today. We've been told that we're going to expect a press conference between 4 and 5 o'clock Doha time, and at which point I'm assuming we're going to get a judgment, and once we know if they're found guilty, what exactly they're found guilty of, we can then go forward with the process of deciding their punishments. Of course, if they're found guilty of the most serious charge of corruption, that's a lifetime ban from